I stood at the door, my hand hovering over the brass handle, wondering if the polished wood would open to the life I had been pretending to live, or if it would tear everything apart. The weight of his mother's gaze, the sharp echo of his father's expectations, loomed in my mind. Lena had never spoken about money with her fiancé, Kevin, a relationship that felt like a fairy tale. Beautiful, steady, and full of promise, had kept the truth about their finances hidden beneath the surface. Lena, making just 100 ling a year, had never wanted to be seen as less than the woman Kevin deserved. But when he invited her to a formal dinner with his parents at their grand estate, her curiosity shifted from the fear of inadequacy to a desire to see how they truly saw her, someone they didn't know as well as they thought. But she wasn't prepared for the truth she was about to walk into. The phone rang, slicing through the quiet of the room like a sharp breath. I let it ring 3 times before I picked it up, knowing it was Kevin. The call felt heavier than usual. His voice on the other end was light, but I could hear the uncertainty buried beneath his words. "Q, how for appearance, Daka, take cas. We're having dinner with my parents this weekend," he said. "I'd love for you to come." Ka. His voice didn't break. It never did. But there was something about the way he said it so casually that made me pause. Dinner with his parents. I held the phone to my ear and let the silence between us stretch. I looked around my apartment. The paint on the walls was chipped in places where I'd gotten too impatient with the brush. The couch was old, too old, with a faded floral pattern that used to make me laugh when I bought it secondhand. The coffee table had a crack in it, a small one, but it was enough to make you notice. There was a steady hum from the refrigerator in the corner, but other than that, the silence was thick, like the walls were holding their breath with me. Kevin's voice came through again, drawing me back to the conversation. "It's just dinner, Lena. No big deal." But it felt like a big deal, a huge deal. It felt like everything I'd been keeping quiet about for months. The small, subtle things that made me different from him were suddenly going to be laid bare. His family didn't know about my small office job or my apartment with peeling paint. They didn't know how much I was stretching every paycheck just to keep up appearances. I nodded without realizing, the words of the invitation still hanging heavy in the air. "I'll be there," I said. And that was it. The decision was made, but the knot in my chest wouldn't loosen. The days leading up to dinner passed slowly. I spent every moment thinking about it. What would I wear? Would it be too much if I wore the dress Kevin had given me for Christmas? It was beautiful, but too much for a simple dinner. I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard, but I didn't want to look too casual either. I wondered if they would notice my shoes, the ones that were starting to show wear, and the small scuff on the heel that I hadn't had the time to fix. Each thought tangled into the next, building a quiet anxiety that felt too heavy to ignore. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the mirror. I felt small, not in the way someone feels when they're uncomfortable in a crowd, but in the way you feel when you know you don't belong. And when Kevin picked me up that night, he was his usual self, confident, easygoing. His hair was perfectly in place, his smile effortless. He looked at me, then glanced at his watch. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer now, like he was sensing the tension even though I hadn't said a word. I nodded, my fingers fumbling with the strap of my purse. "Yeah, just thinking about meeting your parents." He smiled at that, a small chuckle escaping his lips. "They're nice, I promise. You'll be fine." But I didn't feel fine. I felt like I was about to walk into a world I wasn't ready to enter. The sound of the car engine humming beneath me felt far too loud, as though everything in that moment was amplifying my worries. The smell of leather and old coffee filled the car, and outside the window, the streetlights blurred together, streaking the road with bright, unforgiving light. We pulled into the long, curved driveway, the headlights illuminating the pristine facade of the house ahead. The air felt different here, like it was holding its breath, too. I looked out the window at the sprawling lawn, the trees that seemed to bend just so, all perfectly manicured. The house loomed, grand but somehow cold, like it was waiting for something, waiting for me. And Kevin turned the engine off, and the silence between us felt thick. "You sure you're okay?" he asked again, his voice dropping, the warmth of his hand brushing mine across the seat. "Yeah, just a little nervous," I admitted. It felt like I was admitting something big, something that shouldn't matter, but did. "Yeah, you don't need to be nervous. They're going to love you," Kevin said, squeezing my hand a little tighter. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I watched as his hand slowly fell back to his side. The door clicked open, and I stepped out, my heels tapping on the pavement as I made my way toward the door. Kevin was right beside me, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was alone in the crowd. When the door opened, I was greeted by a smell of rich food, of roasting meat and sweet spices. A fire crackled somewhere in the distance, soft murmurs of voices floating in from another room. Kevin's father, tall and sharp-featured, stepped forward with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His mother followed closely behind, her eyes bright but calculating, as though she were already sizing me up. The conversation flowed around me like a river, words I couldn't quite catch, or maybe I didn't want to. My fingers brushed the fabric of my dress, the one Kevin had bought me, and I felt myself sink deeper into the silence that pressed against my chest. I was trying so hard to smile, but it didn't feel real. So hard to smile. Their world felt so polished, so out of reach, and here I was, trying to fit into a space that wasn't made for me. Dinner was served, and I couldn't help but notice the fine china, the delicate crystal glassware that seemed to glitter in the candlelight. Kevin's father talked about investments, about deals, about a life I couldn't even imagine. I nodded along, adding nothing to the conversation, just watching Kevin, watching me. The clink of silverware was too loud in my ears, and I wondered, as I sat there, if they could tell. Compassion FD. If they could tell that I didn't belong here, not in the way they thought. The evening stretched on, and with every passing minute, I felt more and more like a guest in my own life. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment of air. As I stood there, looking at myself in the mirror, I tried to breathe, to pull myself together. I had no idea how to navigate this world, but I had to, because the moment had already arrived, and there was no turning back. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it had any right to. I could hear it as I paced back and forth, Wu-chi-nai, each step in rhythm with the echo of time moving slower than it should. I wasn't sure how long I'd been in this room. Maybe it was 5 minutes, maybe an hour. The room didn't care. The mirror across from me reflected a version of myself that seemed unfamiliar. I stared at my reflection, noticing the way the light caught my hair, the way the fabric of my dress hung just a little too stiff. I still wasn't sure if this was the woman Kevin had invited to dinner, or the woman he'd been waiting to meet. I didn't need to check the clock again. I knew the time. It was like the hours had already settled into my bones. The quiet of the apartment pressed in, thick like the air before a storm. I stood before the mirror, smoothing the fabric of the dress over and over. It was a soft shade of navy, something Kevin had bought me a while ago. At first, I'd liked it, as Emmingfreibel Tremendesenten Supper Amau, but now it felt too much, too polished, too careful. I ran my fingers down the side, tracing the smoothness of the material, trying to force the discomfort to go away. The room smelled faintly of lavender, a candle I had lit hours ago. It was supposed to calm me. Instead, it made the space feel smaller, more confining. I glanced at the clock again. Just a few minutes until he'd be here, until I would be stepping into a world I wasn't sure I belonged in. His world. I knew what the night was supposed to be, dinner with Kevin's parents. It sounded so simple when he said it, like it was nothing more than a casual evening. But to me, it felt like everything. A chance to prove I wasn't as different from him as I thought. A chance to fit into a life that had always felt just out of reach. I took a deep breath. The mirror didn't offer any answer. I turned away from the reflection and started pacing again, each step making the floorboards creak underfoot. I stepped toward the floorboards. There was nothing wrong with the apartment. It had everything I needed, really. A roof over my head, a space just big enough for me to exist in. But when I looked around, all I saw was what it wasn't. It wasn't the sleek kitchen in his family's house. It wasn't the bright marble countertops and polished wood floors. It wasn't the life he had grown up with. It wasn't the world he belonged to. I picked up my phone from the counter, my fingers hovering over the screen. I didn't need to check it. I knew there was nothing new. No messages, no missed calls. Just the soft hum of the apartment around me, the sound of my breath, and the weight. The silence felt heavy, like I was wrapped in it, unable to move through it. I checked the time again, half expecting to see Kevin's name flash across the screen, but there was nothing. Maybe I was waiting for him to tell me everything would be fine. Maybe I just wanted him to tell me that I wasn't going to feel so out of place. I looked back at the dress again. Was it enough? Was it too much? There was no way to know. The fabric was smooth in my hands, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everything about me, this moment, this life, wasn't enough. Just then, I heard the familiar hum of his car engine pulling into the driveway. The sound broke the stillness, and I felt a knot tighten in my chest. I didn't have time to breathe before there was a soft knock at the door. I didn't answer right away. I just stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the quiet settle in again. The knock came again, softer this time, like it was waiting for me to make a decision. Go. I walked to the door, my fingers brushing the handle with hesitation. The cold metal felt strange, too solid against the warmth of my hand. When I opened it, there he was, Kevin, standing on the other side with that same easy smile, the one that never quite reached his eyes when something was on his mind. But it wasn't his smile that made the air feel heavier. It was the way he stood there, waiting for me to say something, waiting for me to feel ready. "Again, hey," he said, his voice warm like always. "You ready?" I nodded, even though I wasn't sure what I was ready for. "Yeah, just let me grab my bag." Kevin smiled again, but this time it didn't quite feel the same. There was something missing in it, something I couldn't name. It wasn't that he wasn't trying, it was that he didn't know what I was feeling. He didn't know how hard it was to step into a world that wasn't made for me. I grabbed my purse from the kitchen counter, my fingers brushing the leather. The weight of it felt wrong, like it was too small to hold everything I needed it to. I glanced at the mirror again, but this time I didn't recognize the face staring back. Kevin's voice broke through the quiet once more, and I followed him outside. The cool air hit me as soon as the door closed behind us, the sound of the wind swirling through the trees around the house. I felt a little out of place in the evening light, snam by, as though the world had shifted slightly and I wasn't sure how to keep up. Kevin's car was parked at the end of the driveway, headlights cutting through the dark. I followed him to the car, and as I slid into the passenger seat, I caught a glimpse of myself in the window. The woman in the reflection was different from the one who'd paced in the apartment. This one looked like she was waiting for something. But what was she waiting for? Kevin's smile never faltered as he started the engine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping through my fingers, and I didn't know if I was ready to catch it. The tires hummed against the asphalt, steady, rhythmic. The air outside had grown cooler, and I could feel the night stretching out in front of us like a long road, dark and unknown. Kevin's hands rested lightly on the wheel, his fingers tapping to the soft beat of the radio, a song I didn't recognize. I could hear the low murmur of his voice as he talked about work, about a new project he was excited about, but all I could hear was the silence that followed his words, like they were just sounds filling the empty space between us. I looked out the window, the trees bending overhead, their branches stretching toward the sky like they were trying to pull the stars down. I didn't belong here. The car was smooth, too smooth. Leather seats that didn't quite feel like mine. The quiet hum of the engine almost masking the tension that had settled between us. I could feel it just beneath the surface, a weight pressing against my chest. Kevin talked and talked. Tifals and the nice and the ba. About his day, about his plans, about how he was excited for tonight. His voice was easy. His words came out without effort, like he was comfortable in his own skin, his own life. But I wasn't. The trees blurred by, a long line of them stretching as far as the eye could see, their shadows flickering across the road. I felt the weight of the night pressing in, a world I didn't know, a world I didn't fit into. My fingers gripped the edge of my seat, feeling the cool leather beneath my fingers. I tried to focus on the road, on Kevin's voice, on the things that didn't matter. But it was hard to concentrate when everything around me seemed to remind me how different I was. I looked at Kevin, the soft glow from the dashboard casting a gentle light over his face. His eyes were focused on the road, but I could see the way he smiled as he talked, his smile so sure, so easy. How could he be so sure of everything? How could he not feel the quiet unease that wrapped itself around me like a second skin? I tried to match his rhythm, slipping into the small talk we'd always shared, the little conversations we'd had during countless evenings in his apartment. I asked him about his day, about something I knew he cared about, but the words felt hollow. His responses were short, polite, and I could hear the air between us thickening. It wasn't that he was being rude, it wasn't that he didn't care, it was just that he didn't know. He didn't know how much I felt the weight of my own insecurities, how every conversation with him felt like a dance I couldn't quite keep up with. I kept watching him, his face lit by the soft light from the dashboard, the way his lips moved when he spoke. It all felt so easy for him, like he was always in the right place, doing the right thing. And then there was me. I wasn't in the right place. I wasn't doing the right thing. I wasn't sure if I ever would be. The silence stretched between us again, a soft pause in his conversation that felt louder than any words. I could feel the walls I'd built around myself tightening, like the car was a small box I couldn't escape from. I looked out the window again, watching the trees blur past, their shapes blending into the dark. The road felt endless, winding around curves and bends I couldn't see. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on a road I didn't belong on. I couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't see me the way I saw myself. Kevin's voice broke the silence, like he was pulling me back into the conversation, into his world. He smiled again, the kind of smile that seemed to reach into everything he said. "You've been quiet," he said, glancing over at me for a moment, his eyes soft. "Is everything okay?" Oh, Kent. I didn't know how to answer that. Everything was fine. Everything was fine, except for the fact that I felt like I didn't belong. I looked at him, at the way his face seemed to glow with the ease of someone who had everything figured out. I wanted to ask him if he ever felt the weight of the things he didn't say, the things that didn't get mentioned in the spaces between words. But I didn't. "Yeah," I said, my voice thin, like it was just a sound to fill the empty air. "I'm fine," he didn't push. Kevin never did. But the question hung there, unanswered, like a small weight pressing down on my chest. The road ahead didn't seem to get any clearer. It didn't seem to open up to anything. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to tell him that everything was more complicated than he realized. That I wasn't just fine. That I wasn't just fine. But I couldn't, because maybe, deep down, I wasn't sure if he would understand. The car shifted slightly as we made a turn, the tires kicking up a small spray of gravel. The light from the dashboard flickered, casting shadows over Kevin's face. For a moment, I saw the small lines around his eyes, the tiredness that never seemed to show, even when he was tired. But I didn't know how to tell him that. We kept driving, the silence folding in around us again. I looked at the road ahead, the trees bending toward the car, as though they were leaning in to hear something I couldn't say. The night stretched out, a long, dark road ahead of us, and I wondered how much longer I could keep pretending that everything was fine. I felt the weight of the world in my chest, heavy and full. I didn't know what was ahead, but I knew that something had changed between us, even if Kevin hadn't noticed it yet. The car hummed beneath me, the sound of the tires against the road steady and quiet. But in the silence, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was slowly drifting away from him, lost in a place that wasn't mine. But except Poink, and maybe, just maybe, I was afraid I wouldn't find my way back. The trees stretched on, and I held my breath, waiting for something to change. But the road ahead only seemed to grow longer. The gravel crunched under the tires as we turned into the long, winding driveway. The house sat at the end of it, looming tall and stately, its windows glowing softly in the evening light. It was like a painting, perfect in every way, too perfect, maybe. The lawn stretched out before it, green and carefully manicured, with no blemish to break the illusion. I couldn't help but feel the weight of it all, like stepping into a place where I didn't belong. Kevin's hand was still warm on mine, but it didn't ease the tightness in my chest. I had known from the moment Kevin mentioned dinner with his parents that this moment was coming. But nothing could have prepared me for the house. It wasn't just a house, it was an estate. Everything about it was grand, deliberate, and so far beyond what I had ever imagined for myself. The gate had a thick iron frame, the kind that creaked when it opened, like it had been shut for too long. Kevin's car was just another piece of the polished puzzle here. The leather seats, the gentle hum of the engine, the sound of his voice. It all felt too easy, like everything in his life had been sorted out, arranged neatly, while mine felt cluttered, incomplete. His voice broke through my thoughts, asking if I was okay. "Yeah," I said. I forced a smile, just a little nervous. He laughed, squeezing my hand. "There's nothing to worry about," but the knot in my stomach only tightened. The car came to a stop in front of the grand entrance, and Kevin cut the engine. I didn't move at first. The house loomed before me, its tall columns rising high into the sky. The light from inside spilled out onto the driveway, warm and inviting, but it only made the space feel colder to me. The door opened with a soft click, and Kevin stepped out. I followed him, my feet hesitant, dragging like they didn't want to carry me any further into this world. Yeah, his parents were already waiting for us on the front steps. His mother, elegant in a soft blue dress, was the first to greet me. She stepped forward with a smile, but her eyes didn't meet mine. She looked at me, then quickly away, like she was measuring me up. I couldn't help but feel the weight of it. Now, the way her gaze flickered over me, like I was something she hadn't quite decided about. Aunt Kevin's father stepped forward next, shaking my hand with a firm grip that felt too strong. His smile was wide, welcoming even, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. I smiled back, my lips feeling stiff, like I was trying too hard. The warmth in their words did nothing to settle the strange discomfort swirling inside me. Inside, the house was just as grand as I'd imagined. The floors were polished wood, gleaming under the soft light of the chandelier hanging overhead. Every corner was perfect. Every room was filled with pieces that looked like they belonged in a museum, yet none of it felt real. The air smelled faintly of expensive perfume, the kind that lingers but never feels like it belongs in your own skin. Young Kevin's mother offered me a drink, her voice smooth as silk. I hesitated before accepting. I wasn't sure if I was nervous about the drink or the way she had looked at me. Please, Lena," she said, as if she were inviting me into her world. A world I wasn't sure I was supposed to be a part of. I smiled and took the drink, but it felt like something was slipping between us, something I couldn't quite catch. As the evening progressed, I found myself struggling to keep up with the conversations. Kevin's father talked about his investments and business trips, his voice deep and measured. His mother spoke softly, asking polite questions, but I could sense something more beneath the surface. She wasn't asking about my day or what I liked to do for fun. She was asking questions that felt calculus, like she was trying to gauge how well I would fit into their world. I could feel the way she looked at me, like I wasn't quite good enough, like I hadn't proven myself yet. I smiled and nodded, answering when necessary, but every word felt hollow in my mouth. It wasn't that they were rude. They weren't. They were just distant, like they already knew who I was, even though they didn't. I glanced at Kevin. His smile was effortless as he conversed with his parents. He talked as if this was the most natural thing in the world. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't see what I saw, that he didn't feel the weight of my insecurities pressing down on me. His ease made me feel more out of place. Tom, and I couldn't tell him how much I wanted to be the woman he saw, the woman they expected. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment to gather myself. The walls of the bathroom felt too close, like I couldn't breathe. The light overhead was bright, too bright, and I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I didn't know who this woman was staring back at me. She didn't feel like me. She felt like someone trying too hard to fit into a world she didn't belong in. I took a deep breath and ran my hands over my dress. I had chosen it carefully. A navy dress, something simple but still elegant. But it felt wrong now, too polished, too out of place in this house where everything was perfect. I touched my hair, pulling it over my shoulder, trying to shake the unease that had settled into my bones. When I returned to the living room, Kevin's parents were still talking, still caught up in their world. Kevin looked over at me and smiled. But this time, his smile felt different. It was warmer, like he was trying to reassure me, but it didn't reach the rest of him. I sat back down, trying to relax, but I could feel the weight of their eyes on me. Not in a way that was overt, but in a way that made me feel like I was being measured, like I was a puzzle piece they were trying to fit into a picture that wasn't mine. The conversation continued, but I wasn't really listening anymore. I was lost in the way the light from the chandelier cast shadows across the room, the farfarnamd, in the way the air seemed too still, in the way my thoughts had become a quiet hum in my head. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't, because leaving would mean admitting that I didn't belong here. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to know if I ever would. The soft clink of silverware was the loudest sound in the room. I sat there, at the edge of the table, watching as the crystal glasses caught the light in ways that felt foreign to me. The dinner table was set perfectly, like something out of a magazine: white china, delicate crystal, gleaming forks and knives. It all felt too polished, too much for someone like me. I glanced around at the guests, Kevin, his parents, and me. I could almost hear the air holding its breath. Correct, centine pevites and Bernana might have inspected. The room smelled faintly of rosemary and garlic, the kind of smell that filled your lungs and made you feel small. The dining room was grand, just like everything else here, with high ceilings and long windows that let in the last light of the day. The walls were decorated with old portraits, the kind that seemed to follow you with their eyes, judging, waiting. Kevin sat next to me, his shoulder brushing mine. He had a quiet confidence in this space, like he was a part of it, like it was made for him. His parents, too, seemed at home here, their voices low, each word measured. His mother was at the head of the table, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes scanning the room, never resting too long on any one thing, as if everything had to be in perfect order. I wasn't sure what part of me didn't fit in. Maybe it was the way my fingers gripped the edge of the chair, like I needed something to hold on to. Or maybe it was the way I felt too loud in the silence, like I was a poorly rehearsed character in a play I wasn't meant to be part of. Yeah? The conversation around me drifted, talk of investments, deals, the finer details of life that felt so distant. They spoke like their world was the only one that mattered. I tried to follow along, to keep up, but the words felt like they belonged to someone else. I wasn't sure how to make them mine. And Kevin's father, tall and broad-shouldered, was speaking now, his voice deep and firm as he described the latest business venture. He had a way of speaking that made everything sound important, like every word carried weight. I nodded along, pretending to understand, but each sentence made me feel smaller. His mother, on the other hand, smiled politely, asking about the details of their life in a way that felt more like an interrogation than a conversation. The questions were soft, wrapped in silk, but they cut deep. She asked about my job, about my upbringing, things I hadn't thought to share, unsure I'd have to, things I wasn't sure I should have to explain. The food arrived, served with quiet precision, the plates set down in front of us like a performance. The meat was perfectly cooked, the vegetables arranged just so, as if every bite had been carefully considered. I picked up my fork, but it felt too heavy in my hand. The delicate porcelain of the plate felt foreign, the edge of it too sharp. I tried to speak, to join in. "It's a nice evening," I said, the words coming out more awkwardly than I intended. Count Kevin's mother smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, it's lovely. Yes, it's lovely. We always enjoy these dinners," she said, her voice calm and practiced, like she had said it 1,000 times before. The silence settled again. Kevin's father gave a small nod, his gaze flickering over me before he turned back to his conversation. His eyes held a slight smile, but it wasn't the kind that reassured you. It was the kind that made you feel out of place. "Yo!" I pressed my lips together and picked at my food. The fork scraped against the plate, but it felt like it was scraping against my nerves. Everything about this evening, this world, felt wrong. Like I was a stranger in a house I had no right to be in. As the dinner continued, I tried harder. I tried to talk, to be part of the conversation, to break through the walls of politeness that surrounded us. But each time I opened my mouth, my words felt too small, too insignificant to matter in this space. Kevin glanced at me, his eyes soft, but I could see the way his smile faltered for a moment. I felt it then, a gap widening between us, one I wasn't sure how to bridge. Maybe it was the way I looked at the table, the way I couldn't seem to make myself feel comfortable. Or maybe it was the way his family was looking at me. His mother, in particular, who seemed to see me but not really look at me. You're doing well," Kevin said, his voice quiet, but his eyes searching mine for reassurance. His hand brushed mine, but I didn't feel reassured. I felt the weight of his gaze, the pressure to fit into this world that wasn't mine. "Affatenuptupsterps automanator." I smiled weakly, but it didn't feel real. It felt like I was performing, like I was playing a role I didn't know how to act in. "I'm fine," I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. I saw his father's lips twitch into a slight smile, and I realized then I wasn't really part of this. I never had been. The conversation drifted again, the voices flowing around me like a river I couldn't swim in. I felt lost in the soft clink of glasses, the quiet murmur of polite exchanges. I looked at the table, the silverware, the crystal glasses, all so carefully arranged. The whole evening was like a performance I wasn't meant to understand. The light from the chandelier overhead seemed too bright, too warm, as if it was spotlighting the distance between us. Kevin's voice was still gentle, but I couldn't find the words to tell him what I was feeling. I couldn't explain why I felt so out of place, and the moment in the no. Why his mother's eyes made me feel like I was being measured. Why his father's politeness felt like judgment. I stared at my plate, pushing my food around, trying to make myself small in a world that didn't want me to be anything but. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of everything I didn't know how to say. And when the evening finally ended, when we rose from the table and said our polite goodbyes, I felt like I was stepping back into a world that was too big for me. Kevin's hand brushed mine as we walked toward the door, but the space between us felt wider than it had before. Okay, maybe I was just overthinking things. Maybe it was me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stepped into a world that wasn't mine, and I wasn't sure if I ever would be. The door clicked shut behind us, and the cold night air hit me as we stepped outside. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. And for the first time that evening, I didn't feel like I was pretending anymore. The candlelight flickered on the table, casting soft shadows against the walls. The room seemed suspended in time, each moment stretching out longer than the last. The clink of silverware was muted, like it was happening somewhere far away, not here with me, at this table. I reached for my glass of water, my fingers brushing the cool surface, trying to steady the tremble that ran through me. Kevin's family sat across from me, talking in that gentle, practiced way they always did. But something in the air felt different tonight, like I was finally starting to see the cracks in the perfect picture. Ren, Fonk Frat. The conversation around the table moved in slow circles, like they were trying to include me, but the words felt distant. Kevin's father, deep in conversation about his latest business ventures, leaned back in his chair, his voice steady and commanding. His mother, seated at the head of the table, always the picture of poise, smiled politely. She was the quiet force of the room, always attentive, always listening, but I could feel the way she observed everything, like she was measuring, calculating. The house was still, the air was thick, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. I could feel it in the way my hands gripped the edge of my chair, in the way my eyes flitted around the room, looking for something to steady myself. This house was too perfect, too polished. The silverware was aligned just so, the glasses sparkled, the food served with an almost eerie precision. I had always felt like I was outside looking in, but tonight it was harder to pretend that I belonged. Kevin's voice broke through my thoughts, a question floating in the air between us. What about you, Lena? How's work going? I hesitated, my fingers tapping the rim of my glass. It's good, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. I work at a small marketing firm. It's nothing fancy, just a lot of small projects, you know. I didn't look at Kevin's mother as I spoke. I couldn't. Her eyes were too sharp, too calculating, like she was already assessing me, measuring the space between us. The silence that followed was thick, like the words I hadn't said were hanging in the air between us. Kevin, his voice bright and unbothered, filled the gap. She's being modest, he said, glancing at me with a smile. Hey. Lena's got great potential. She's been putting together some really big pitches lately. My heart skipped in my chest. It wasn't that he was wrong. I had been working hard, trying to make something of myself, trying to carve a space in a world that had always seemed out of reach. But hearing him speak about it so easily, so confidently, made everything feel more exposed. It was like the modesty I'd tried so hard to protect, the smallness of my life, had been lifted and laid bare in front of them. With sicky cow, Kevin's mother didn't say anything at first. Her smile tightened, and for a moment she simply studied me, her gaze lingering longer than it should have. I could feel her eyes on me, like she was looking for something, not the potential Kevin saw, something more, something hidden. Kaka. The air felt colder, the room felt smaller. My fingers clenched around the glass, my knuckles white against the smooth surface. Kevin was still talking, oblivious to the shift in the atmosphere. He was proud of me, and I loved him for that. But there was something about the way his words hung in the air that made me feel small again, like I was a story he'd rehearsed too many times and now it didn't quite fit. I glanced up, catching his mother's eyes for a fleeting moment. Her expression was unreadable, her smile still there, but it wasn't warm. It wasn't the smile of someone who was proud. It was the smile of someone who was waiting for something, looking for something to confirm what she already suspected. I shifted in my seat, feeling the weight of her gaze like 1,000 little needles against my skin. The room was suddenly too quiet, too still. Kevin's voice softened as he asked his father another question about business, but I couldn't focus on the words. I was caught in the space between Kevin's pride in me, and the cool distance that seemed to emanate from his mother. Yeah. I tried to fill the silence to make it go away, but my words seemed to fall flat. I mean, it's a good job. I enjoy it, I said, the words sounding hollow, like I was trying to convince myself as much as them. Ah, his mother nodded, her eyes still on me, but her lips were pressed into a thin line. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. And that's when I realized she didn't need to ask more questions. She didn't need to probe any deeper. She had already decided what she thought of me, what I was worth in her world. Yeah, okay. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur, the clink of silverware and the murmur of polite conversation too distant to grasp. I could feel the space between us widening, a quiet chasm I didn't know how to bridge. I smiled when necessary, nodded when I had to, but it all felt like a performance I wasn't prepared for. As we finished the meal, Kevin reached across the table, his hand finding mine, and for a brief moment I allowed myself to feel the warmth of it. But it didn't last. His mother's gaze was still there, a quiet weight in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I hadn't said, something she already knew. And I couldn't decide if it was better to confront it, to ask her what she really thought, or to simply let it sit between us, unspoken. The silence followed me as we stood to leave, the door clicking shut behind us. Kevin squeezed my hand again, his smile soft, but in that moment I knew. There was something unspoken in this house, something hidden beneath the polite smiles, and I wasn't sure if I would ever be able to see it clearly. As we stepped into the cold night air, the darkness wrapped around us, but I could still feel the weight of the evening in my chest. The truth had been there all along. I just didn't know if I was ready to face it. The last bite of food lay cold on my plate, untouched. The dim glow of the chandelier above cast long shadows across the polished table, and every clink of silverware felt like it was coming from somewhere far away. The laughter of Kevin's parents filled the room, but it sounded muffled, like it was echoing through a tunnel I wasn't supposed to be in. I picked up my glass of wine, the stem cool in my fingers, but I didn't drink. I just stared at the deep red liquid, watching it swirl in the glass. Something didn't feel right. The evening had started out warm, too warm almost for me. The large dining room was filled with the soft hum of conversation, the delicate clinking of china, and the scent of food that felt too rich, too unfamiliar. Kevin's parents were charming, kind, even, but each word they spoke seemed to land in the space between us, like they belonged to someone else, somewhere else. Kevin was sitting beside me, casually dipping his bread into his soup, his shoulders relaxed. He fit into this space so naturally, the way he laughed, the way he looked at his parents with that easy affection. I couldn't help but feel like I was watching them through a glass, like I was on the outside, pressing my nose up against the window, but never really allowed inside. Kevin's mother, elegant and composed, had taken to sharing stories of her childhood. She spoke of her old friends, the ones who had gone on to great things, the ones who still held on to their success like it was something to be proud of. Her voice was soft but commanding. Every sentence seemed carefully measured, like each word had a purpose. Permux. His father joined in, talking about investments, about land they owned, about their old neighborhood. The past was a distant thing for them, something to be polished and admired, and me? I sat there, a small presence in the room, the only one not playing along. I wasn't sure what my role was, or if I even had one. The words felt foreign. The food didn't taste like food. The house didn't feel like a house. I smiled when I needed to, nodded when I should, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was hidden, something I wasn't meant to see. Conversation shifted again. Kevin's father was talking about his business, about the people he worked with, about the successes they'd all shared. It was a gentle boasting, as though everything in their lives had gone exactly as planned. Kevin nodded along, occasionally chiming in with stories of his own. I couldn't help but admire how effortlessly he fit into this world, how natural it seemed for him to be here, in this house, with his parents, surrounded by the perfect memories they had made together. But I couldn't seem to find my place. Then Kevin's mother turned her attention to me. It was subtle, like a passing breeze, but I could feel it. She tilted her head slightly, as if considering something. "Lena," she said, her voice sweet but probing, "tell me again where you're from?" I hesitated, the question catching me off guard. My mind raced, trying to find the right words, but nothing seemed to fit. I grew up in a small town, I said, keeping my voice steady, hoping the answer would be enough. And your parents? She pressed, the question coming so casually, as though she didn't even notice the tension that suddenly bloomed in my chest. I paused again, my heart skipping a beat. They're fine, I managed. I wanted to say more, but I wasn't sure what she was asking for, what she wanted to know. Was she asking about my family's background, my life, my struggles? I wasn't sure. But then, just as I was about to offer something more, Kevin's mother continued, almost absent-mindedly, I know your family's been through a lot. Your mother's health, right? I froze. My hand tightened around my glass, the cold glass biting into my fingers. I didn't remember ever telling Kevin's parents about my mother's illness. I hadn't mentioned it in years. Not to anyone, but there it was, hanging in the air like a ghost I couldn't shake. And Kevin's mother's eyes were on me now, studying me in a way that felt too familiar, too knowing. I looked over at Kevin, but he was still talking with his father, oblivious to the shift in the room. My heart beat faster. Why hadn't he told me? Why hadn't he warned me that they knew? Kevin's voice trailed off as he turned toward me, his eyes soft with a smile that didn't quite reach his gaze. What's the matter, babe? He asked, his voice still light. I could feel the weight of his mother's gaze on me, the weight of his father's quiet scrutiny. And suddenly, I felt like I was standing on a stage, exposed and vulnerable, with everyone watching, waiting for me to speak. I looked at Kevin, then at his mother, and I felt the smallness of my life press down on me. How? How did you know about my mother? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I couldn't keep it in anymore. Kevin's mother didn't flinch, she didn't look surprised. Her smile softened, but it didn't reach her eyes. Kevin mentioned it to us a while ago, she said, her tone still light, warm, as though this was all just casual conversation. But it wasn't. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls too high, too perfect. I had never told Kevin about my family's struggles, about my mother's health. I'd kept it buried deep inside, pretending it didn't matter. And now, here I was, sitting at this table, in this house, with Kevin's family knowing things about me I hadn't shared. Why hadn't he told me? Why hadn't he prepared me for this? The questions flooded my mind, but I couldn't ask them. I couldn't voice the discomfort that was crawling under my skin. The evening continued, but I wasn't really present anymore. I watched Kevin's parents smile and laugh, heard their stories about things I couldn't relate to, and I felt the weight of their expectations hanging between us like a shadow I couldn't escape. The soft murmur of conversation faded into the background. Kevin's hand brushed mine across the table, his warmth offering a fleeting comfort. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping through my fingers, something that had been hidden beneath the surface for so long. As I stood up from the table, I could feel the quiet distance between Kevin and me growing. Even though he didn't notice it yet, even though hung knotless, the room was still warm, but I was cold. Kevin smiled at me, asking if I was ready to leave. I nodded, but my heart felt heavy, full of things I hadn't said, full of truths I hadn't known were there. The door clicked shut behind us, and as we stepped into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the truth had just started to unravel. The house was quiet. The only sound was the soft tick of the clock on the wall, marking time that seemed to stretch longer with each second. I sat on the edge of the couch, my fingers brushing the fabric of the cushions, feeling the coolness of the room seep into my skin. Kevin had just gone to take a phone call in the other room, and the silence was suffocating. I couldn't sit still anymore. My mind raced, the words I'd been holding in for hours, maybe longer, beginning to churn in my chest. I stood up, pacing the floor, the soles of my shoes whispering across the hardwood. Every inch of this house felt too big, too perfect, and I felt smaller than ever. Kevin's parents had already gone to bed. The evening had ended with the kind of polite goodbyes you give to guests who are supposed to stay longer, but you can't quite pretend anymore. The walls of this house, the grand walls that stretched above me, now felt like they were closing in. I could feel the tension I'd been swallowing all evening pressing on my chest, suffocating me. I tried to make sense of it, of the dinner, of the conversations, of the things that were said, and those that were left unspoken. Kevin had painted a picture for me of his family, kind, open, welcoming, but tonight I'd seen something else. Something colder, more calculated, lurking beneath their polite smiles. I tried to shake it off, but the doubt was there now, like a small crack in a mirror that only gets wider when you look away. And when Kevin stepped back into the living room, I didn't even look at him right away. My eyes stayed fixed on the floor, and I could feel the weight of the words in my mouth. Lena? Kevin's voice was soft, like he was trying to read the room. What's going on? I finally looked up at him, and the words tumbled out before I could stop them. Why didn't you tell me? His brow furrowed, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. Tell you what? The truth, I said, the words coming out more harshly than I meant them to. About your family. About their wealth, about what they expect from me. Kevin stepped back slightly, his expression shifting. What are you talking about? I took a shaky breath. I mean, Kevin, what did you expect? That I would just walk into their world and fit in? I didn't know anything about them. About how much? About how much you had, about the way they live. You never told me. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. Why didn't you tell me? He didn't answer right away, standing there, his mouth slightly open, like he was searching for the right words. I didn't think it mattered, he said finally, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. I felt my stomach twist. You didn't think it mattered? My voice was trembling now, and I couldn't stop it. You didn't think I should know about your family's wealth? About how they see me? About how I don't belong in their world? The silence stretched between us. Kevin's face had softened, but I could see it. The hesitation in his eyes, the way he was shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Lena, I never wanted you to feel like you weren't enough, he said, his voice quiet. That's why I never said anything. I didn't want you to feel uncomfortable. I wanted you to be with me, just me, not my family. But I couldn't stop the feeling that bubbled up inside me, the frustration, the confusion. But you let me be uncomfortable, Kevin. You let me walk into a situation I wasn't prepared for. You never warned me about their expectations. You never warned me about how they'd look at me, how she'd look at me. Kevin shifted on his feet again, his eyes darting away from mine eye. I didn't know how to bring it up. I didn't think it would matter to you. But it does matter, I whispered, the words coming out quieter than I meant them to. It matters, Kevin, because all this time I thought I was with someone who understood me. But tonight, it feels like I've been walking in the dark. I let out a breath, the words I was saying heavier than I thought. I thought you knew me, but now I don't even know if you really see me, or if I was just some idea you wanted to have. Kevin's face was pale, and he took a small step toward me, but I took a step back, not sure I could let him near me right now. Not until I understood what was happening. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said, his voice low. His apology was soft, but I could hear the uncertainty in it. And that uncertainty broke something in me, like a small dam inside me had finally cracked open. I closed my eyes, taking another breath, trying to find my footing. I don't know what to believe anymore, I said, barely above a whisper. Everything feels so different now. He didn't speak. He stood there, his hands trembling slightly by his sides, and I could feel the distance between us. It wasn't something physical, but it was real, and it felt like it was getting bigger with each passing second. I turned away from him, looking out the window at the dark street, the streetlights glowing like ghosts. I could hear Kevin's quiet steps behind me, but I didn't turn around. Not yet. I don't know if I can keep pretending everything's okay, I said, my voice breaking slightly. I don't know if I can keep pretending like I fit into this world that's not mine. The room felt smaller now. The shadows from the chandelier flickered across the floor, and all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing and Kevin's silence, and for the first time, I wasn't sure how much longer I could stay in this place. With him, with them, with all these lies I hadn't even known existed. The silence stretched on, but I didn't have the words to fill it anymore. The room was too quiet. The ticking of the clock on the wall was the loudest thing I could hear. It was almost rhythmic, a slow, deliberate beat. I sat on the edge of the couch, my hands folded in my lap, eyes fixed on the window. The streetlights outside cast a pale glow against the glass, their soft light washing over the empty sidewalk. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for, but I could feel it, deep in my bones, the moment that was coming. It was only a matter of time. Kevin had been gone for too long. The silence between us had stretched on for what felt like hours. The words I had wanted to say, the things I had needed to say, hung in the air between us like an invisible weight. He had stepped outside, said he needed a minute, but that minute had stretched into what felt like a lifetime. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't stop thinking. The evening had started with so much promise, So much warmth, but now it all felt fragile. His family's expectations, the things they didn't say, and the things he never told me, it was too much to keep inside. I thought I understood him, but now everything felt different. The shadows in the room seemed to grow longer, darker, and I wasn't sure if I could trust what I was seeing anymore. I looked at the empty space beside me. The couch was too wide for just one person. The air felt too thick with the things unsaid. I wondered if he would come back and pretend like everything was fine, but I wasn't sure if I could pretend anymore. Kega from Andoda. When Kevin finally walked back into the room, his footsteps were quieter than usual. His eyes met mine, and for the first time all evening, there was something in his gaze that wasn't the usual calm assurance. He looked tired, his shoulders slightly slumped, his hands stuffed deep in his pockets. He took a deep breath, like he was preparing to speak, and I could feel the tension in his body, tension before the words. I never wanted you to feel like you weren't enough, he said quietly, his voice softer than I expected. I've always been afraid of how you'd react, how you'd feel about my family, about everything they have. I stayed silent. His words sank in, but they didn't feel like enough. It wasn't just the family's wealth. It wasn't just the way they looked at me. It was the years of quiet lies, the things he never told me. He shifted his weight, looking down at his shoes. I didn't want you to think that you weren't enough. I didn't want you to feel like you didn't fit into this world. His voice trailed off, unsure, like he was searching for the right words but couldn't quite find them. His words hung in the air, and the silence between us grew louder. I felt my heart beat faster, the weight of everything pressing in. I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw the vulnerability in his eyes. I saw the uncertainty I'd never noticed before. But it wasn't just the weight of his words that made me feel exposed. It was the way my own insecurities had been feeding into this. The way I had built a story in my head about who he was, about what he wanted, without ever asking the hard questions. I hadn't just been hurt by his silence. I had been complicit in it too. The fear, the doubt, it had lived in me as much as it had lived in him. I had been afraid too, afraid that I wasn't good enough for him, for his world, for his family. The truth was, I didn't belong here, not because of them, but because of me, because of the walls I had built between myself and everything I was too scared to face. I finally spoke, my voice low, almost a whisper. You could have told me, Kevin. You could have told me everything. But you didn't. My hands trembled slightly as I folded them tighter in my lap. I trusted you. I thought you knew me. But maybe I don't even know myself. Kevin didn't say anything. He just stood there looking at me like he didn't know how to fix what was broken, and that was the moment I realized I didn't know how to fix it either. I didn't know how to fix us, or even if there was something left to fix. I stood up, moving toward the window. The air outside felt cool against my skin as I gazed out at the street below. The darkness seemed to stretch out, endless, and I wondered if that was how my life had always felt, a road I couldn't quite see the end of. The lights from the street lamp flickered, casting long shadows on the pavement. Kevin's voice broke the stillness. Lena, I never meant to hurt you. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I know, I said softly, but the words felt like they belonged to someone else. Sometimes we hurt each other without even knowing it. The room felt smaller now, the silence heavier. The walls between us had always been there, even when I hadn't seen them. Even when I pretended they didn't exist. The clock on the wall ticked on. Each second that passed felt like a reminder of what was lost. I don't know if I can keep pretending anymore, I whispered, more to myself than to him. And with that, the door to my own heart seemed to close just a little bit more. The quiet stretched on, thick like the night, and I wasn't sure if I would ever find the answers I was looking for. But in the stillness, I realized something. Maybe the most important thing I had to figure out was who I was. Apart from him, apart from all the expectations, apart from the lies. The road ahead seemed just as uncertain as the one behind me. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was ready to take the next step. The bathroom light flickered as I stepped in front of the mirror. The cold tile beneath my feet sent a shiver through me, but I didn't move. I just stood there, staring at the reflection, watching the way the soft light bounced off the glass, casting a shadow that seemed to follow me. My hands rested at my sides, fingers curling and uncurling. There was no sound except my own breath, steady but uneven. I'd stood like this before, frozen in the stillness, unsure of how to move forward. But this time, I wasn't afraid to see myself. The silence in the apartment was different today. He was gone, off to work, leaving the house quieter than usual. I should have been used to it by now. I'd spent so many mornings alone, the stillness settling in like an old coat, something familiar and expected. But today, the quiet felt heavier, like the weight of everything that had happened hung in the air. I could still feel the tension from the night before, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The reflection in the mirror stared back at me, the same face I had seen 1,000 times before. The same eyes, the same tired skin. But today, I saw something else beneath it all. A woman who had been holding her breath, waiting for permission to step forward. I didn't recognize her fully. Not yet. But I could feel her stirring like she was finally waking up. The quiet panic I'd felt for days was still there, but it wasn't the same. This time I had something new, a quiet strength, a sense of control that had been missing before. I didn't know where it had come from or when it had taken root, but it was there. And for the first time, I felt like I had the power to change the story that had been written for me. Hey, I turned from the mirror, letting the room close in around me. The sun filtered softly through the blinds, casting thin slivers of light across the floor. I stood still, letting the quiet wash over me for a moment longer. But then, the stillness was broken by the hum of the fridge, the soft swish of the wind outside. It wasn't enough to distract me, not anymore. Ka and Teverai are fine. I pulled open the kitchen cabinet, reaching for the cup I always used. The motion felt robotic, but my mind was far from it. I thought of the conversation with Kevin, how the weight of his silence still hung heavy between us. He had never meant to hurt me, I knew that. But there was a truth he hadn't shared, a truth about his family, about the world they lived in, and the one I had been pretending to fit into. And I had been pretending, for too long. I poured coffee into the mug, the sound of the liquid splashing against ceramic loud in the quiet. I watched the steam rise, the warmth from the cup seeping into my hands. It felt good. But there was something deeper beneath the surface, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. I took a slow sip, my thoughts drifting back to the night before. The tension in the room when Kevin's mother had spoken to me. The way Kevin had looked at me, like he was waiting for something from me that I wasn't sure I could give. I had felt like an outsider. No, more than that. I had felt invisible. But now, standing here in the kitchen, I realized something. It wasn't just his family's expectations that had kept me quiet. It was my own fear of not being enough. My fear of not fitting into the life that had always felt out of reach. I had told myself that I was okay with the way things were, but I wasn't. I had let myself be swallowed by a world I didn't understand, and I had kept quiet about it because I was too scared to confront it. But today, standing in the quiet, I knew it was time to stop pretending. I could feel it deep in my chest. The walls I'd built around myself had been holding me back, but now they felt fragile. They could crumble if I just took a step forward. Kevin wasn't the only one who had been hiding. I had been hiding from myself, and I couldn't do it anymore. I set the mug down on the counter, my fingers brushing the edge. I wasn't sure where the strength had come from, but it was there now. And it was time to face the truth, not just about Kevin's family, but about my own life. I took a deep breath and stood for a moment longer, feeling the weight of the decision that lay ahead. The silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt open, like the space was waiting for me to fill it with something new. I turned toward the window, the soft light of the day illuminating the quiet street outside. The trees swayed gently in the wind, their leaves rustling in a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. I could hear the distant hum of cars passing by, the world moving on while I stood still. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of moving forward. I wasn't afraid of stepping into a life that I could make for myself. I didn't need permission from Kevin or his family. I didn't need their approval to be who I was meant to be. The road ahead wasn't clear, but it was mine, and with that, I finally stepped forward. The door to the future stood open, and for the first time, I was ready to walk through it. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I stepped out of the car. The sound was steady, almost reassuring, like it was grounding me. The house loomed ahead, Kevin's family estate, familiar and foreign all at once. The long driveway stretched out before me, the trees lining it like silent guards. I felt the weight of the air, still and heavy, pressing down on me. But this time, I didn't hesitate. Katatek semita. I wasn't the same woman who had walked through these doors before. The front door opened with a quiet creak, just like last time, and I stepped inside. The smell of fresh flowers mixed with the faint scent of something more expensive than I could place. I didn't let myself look around too much, not at the polished floors or the paintings that hung on the walls like silent reminders of everything I didn't have. Kevin's parents were already at the table, their conversation flowing easily between them, like nothing had changed. I noticed how Kevin sat beside me without hesitation, how his hand brushed against mine under the table, steady and sure. But my fingers were still, clenching around the edge of my seat, trying to keep myself from shrinking into the background. His mother's eyes flicked toward me almost imperceptibly, but this time it didn't sting like it used to. This time I wasn't looking for her approval. I wasn't playing her game. The weight of her gaze was still there, but now it felt different, like it was trying to understand me, not measure me. "Lena," she said, her voice soft but direct, "how have you been?" I didn't look at her right away. Instead, I focused on the simple movement of lifting my glass of water to my lips. The coolness of the glass against my fingers grounded me, but I still felt the subtle pressure of her gaze. Kevin looked at me, his eyes warm, his lips curling into a small smile. But I didn't need his reassurance anymore. "I've been good," I said, the words coming out steady, as calm as the still air in the room. "I've been thinking a lot about what I want." I didn't know if they understood what I meant, but I wasn't trying to explain myself anymore. I wasn't trying to fit into a mold that didn't suit me. The silence that followed felt different now. It wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't waiting for me to say the right thing. It was a moment of quiet acceptance, one I hadn't expected. His mother's lips parted slightly, as if she was about to say something, but she didn't. She only nodded, her fingers resting gently on her wineglass. Kevin's father, cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. The air in the room felt charged, but it wasn't a charge of tension anymore. It was a delicate, fragile peace that hung between us. It felt like they were seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time. And I was seeing them too, not as strangers, not as people I needed to impress, but as the people they were. His father, spoke next, his voice low, but there was a warmth in it I hadn't expected. "You know, Lena, we've always been impressed by your drive. We've heard a lot about your work, your ambition." I nodded, but I didn't speak. The words felt like a soft echo of the story they'd been telling themselves about me. But it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't trying to be anything more than what I was. Kevin's hand found mine under the table again, this time with more weight, more meaning. I felt a surge of something, not relief, but understanding. This was a moment of reckoning, for all of us. "Okay, I've been trying to figure out what it is I want, too," I said quietly, meeting Kevin's eyes across the table. "And for the first time in a long time, I'm not scared to admit it. I don't want to be someone I'm not. I want to be me, the real me." The table fell silent, but this time the silence wasn't suffocating. It was full of possibility. The meal continued, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics, to the things that didn't matter as much anymore. But the air had shifted too. There was a softness to the evening, a peace that had settled over the room like a blanket. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but it was real. For the first time, I wasn't pretending. And for the first time, they weren't asking me to be anything else. Kevin's hand still held mine under the table, his fingers resting gently on top of mine. I squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth spread up my arm. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, but this time it didn't feel like time was running out. As we left the dinner table, Kevin's mother gave me a look, and for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of her judgment. I saw her, truly saw her, and I realized something. We were both learning to let go of the roles we had been trying to play. The door opened, and the cool night air rushed in. The lights from the house behind us flickered faintly. I looked up at the sky, the stars scattered across the dark, endless expanse. For the first time, I didn't feel lost. I didn't know what the future would bring, but I knew one thing. It was mine to shape. And for the first time, I felt ready to face it.